All right, before we get started on how you can 3D print at the library, I just want to talk a little bit about what 3D printing is and what some of its uses are, because I know if this is your first time 3D printing, you might have some questions about that. So 3D printing is how we can take an object that we create digitally and basically print it out as a physical object in the real world. And that can sound a little confusing and even a little bit magical if you've never encountered it before. But basically we can design a 3D model, or we can just find one online, which is what most people will do at the beginning. You'll find models that people have already made. Most of the models you see here were made by others. And then we prepare it through a process called slicing, which we will talk about extensively in this class. We take the model and we basically turn it into layers that the printer can squeeze out through its nozzle. So this is the printer right here behind me. This printer is a Bambu Lab X1 Carbon with a 0.4 millimeter nozzle. That's important for you to know if you are going to do any of your 3D printing preparation from home, because you can download the software onto your own computer because it is free. But if you don't know which model we have, then you'll slice for the wrong printer and then we won't be able to print it out. So again, this is a Bambu Lab X1 Carbon with a 0.4 millimeter nozzle. This printer here has a 256 millimeter cubed bed size, which means it can print about 10 inches in all directions. So that's a pretty big size that you're able to print with. And as you can see here, most models are a lot smaller than that. Now you might be wondering what is used to print. So up here we have our filament rolls, basically plastic threads, and the plastic that's being used is called PLA. It's a bio-based plastic, mostly corn-based, which is used in a lot of 3D printing, and it's pushed down through here, and then there's a nozzle in the printer that superheats it until it's molten, and then it's squeezed out through the nozzle into a very thin layer. And each layer is pushed down on top of each other until it builds up the model that you're making. So if you look at any 3D printed model, and we've got lots of examples here at the library that you can come in and look at, when you look at it, you will actually see the layer lines running through it. And that is how it's built up. This type of printing is called FDM printing. FDM stands for Fused Deposition Modeling. The fused part is because it's molten when it comes out of the nozzle, and so each layer is fusing together. The deposition part is that it's being slowly built up by layers over time, just like a geological formation is built up by having layers of rock and dust and gravel deposited over time. This is the same thing that's happening here. It's just happening much faster. So FDM, Fused Deposition Modeling. Now, if you've heard about 3D printing, you might have also heard about another type of 3D printing called resin printing. Resin printing works on a different principle, even though it's still layer-based. We don't have a resin printer here at the library, so you won't be able to do any resin prints here. Let's talk about some of the uses for 3D printing now that we understand a little bit about what it is. Well, 3D printing is used in all kinds of things, and it's used in all kinds of industries, including engineering, medicine, and toy making. So let's take a look at some of these examples here. First off, let's start with everybody's favorite. This is the Flexi Dragon. The Flexi Dragon is really popular because it's very cool and it moves. Now, this is what's called a print-in-place model, which means all of these little pieces are not assembled after the fact. They print together like this and are still able to move. That's called a print-in-place model. And these are very popular for people who want to get into 3D printing. Just print one of these because they're very fun to play with and they look very cool. So that's kind of the toy part of 3D printing. So toys are fun, and you'll see a lot of that being done. There's also some really useful things that you can do with 3D printing as well. These are different prototypes of a camp table foot. So I had a camp table and the foot broke off of it, which made it unusable. And I was just going to throw that camp table away, but then I figured I could 3D print a new foot for it and it would still be able to work just fine. So this also shows prototyping, which is something you have to do a lot in 3D printing. Normally your first print of something won't work out the way you want it to, particularly if it's something that you are designing yourself. So you print it out, you see how it works, and then you print out a new one. So with this one, I iterated several times and did several different prints on it before I got the foot that I wanted. And you can see several of these are broken in different places because I hadn't designed it right to handle the stresses that were involved. But now I have a foot that works on my camp table, and instead of throwing the camp table away, I was able to keep using it. So it's a great way to kind of keep using things because you can print new replacement parts. Another good example of this is the laser cutter that we have here in the lab, which you can also learn to use. The laser cutter had a part that broke on it, and because the part was on back order, it was going to be several weeks before we could get the laser up and running again. But we were able to print out a new part for it on the 3D printer and have it be down for just a couple of days. So this is a great way to be able to make parts if the parts that you're making can be plastic. Now there are 3D printers that can print in other materials besides plastic, but here at the library we just do plastic for safety reasons. Another good example here of doing something for replacement and also a toy is this one. So I have this chair here that was my daughter's chair for her little toys, and it was a high chair that the baby was supposed to be able to sit in, and she left it out one day and it got stepped on and broken. So that was really a sad experience for her, and we didn't want to buy a whole new set to get another high chair. So I was able to model a new one, and you can see I have a couple of prototypes here that are 3D printed. I started with this one, and then I went to this one, which was a little bit closer to the original and worked a little bit better. This one is brown because it's been painted. So you can paint your 3D models, and then you're able to give them kind of a different look than just having them be a single solid color like 3D printing comes out. Another thing you can do with 3D printing is you can actually combine those plastic pieces with other hardware pieces. So this is a little scraper tool, and the handle and the cover are made out of 3D printed plastic. But then we used a couple of screws to attach the metal blade to the handle, and then also attached magnets to both of them. And so you can take 3D printed parts and combine them with other parts that you're building, such as screws and plates and things like that. All right, we could go on and on with the uses of 3D printing because there are so many of them. And if you come into the lab, you will just find little 3D printed things around the lab that help us to accomplish the work that we do here. For example, over at the embroidery machine, we have some drawers that are 3D printed. On the computers, we have some USB docks that are held in place with 3D printed parts. There's just lots of different uses that you can use 3D printing for. I just want to talk about one more before we close up this video, and that is tabletop gaming. So here we have a little series of things that can be used in tabletop gaming. There's all kinds of games that you can 3D print parts for. Some people like to upgrade existing games. These specifically have to do with the role-playing tabletop gaming, like Dungeons and Dragons or Warhammer or something like that. So over here we have a dice tower, as well as some 3D printed dice. There's some tiles for some terrain, and then there are also minifigures that you can do. Like I mentioned before, this minifigure, Minerva the Minotaur Librarian, is what you will do for your practice project on the 3D printer. So there are all kinds of uses for different things you can do with 3D printing. I hope this video has helped you to start to generate some of your own ideas of places you might like to use 3D printing in your life. Now we're going to go in and we're going to start talking about the actual process of being able to 3D print at the library.